Greetings YouTube! This is Toy Customizer Wake Angel 2001. I know it's been a while, but that's because this is probably one of the most ambitious projects I ever took on. It's E-123 Omega for fellow YouTube user, the CPK Studios, part 1 of 3. You know, it's funny. Even when the figure that I'm customizing isn't a Sonic figure, it still manages to be made by Jazzwares. I just kind of find that hilarious. This is Man Arctica from Fanboy and Chum Chum. He has the basic proportions of E-123 Omega. That's what drew me to him, the huge chest and giant forearms. Of course, he was initially a quite clumsy figure. His tiny legs are practically useless. In this picture right here, he's actually standing more on his fingertips than anything else. Of course, one of the first things I did was take my Dremel to his arms, and I sanded away his bulky muscles, creating the thinner tube-like arms which grace the E-series joists. I then did something that I almost never did before, an elbow transplant. You see, Man Arctica has a bicep swivel, but he does not have elbows, which it's a really weird point of contention. I've never heard of a Jazzwares figure which has one point of articulation in the elbows which is not a proper elbow joint. So what I did was I inserted a pair of broken knuckles arms to make a joint which can bend at the elbow in the way that you would expect. Of course, besides the huge chest, Man Arctica's enormous forearms and hands were another draw for using this particular figure to make Omega. He even has the right number of fingers. So, as you can see here, I used some aluminum foil to fill them out into a more barrel shape so they didn't look so crystally. And I sharpened the fingers by cutting away some material with my X-Acto knife. Then it was a simple sculpt job to give the giant barrel forearms of death, kind of like, or I could have just said Popeye arms, yeah, Omega's Popeye arms, with his big gray pointy fingered hands. So further modification to Man Arctica's body involved covering up his pectoral muscles, bringing his back out a bit, and cutting off the top part of his head. I pretty much left his giant crimson chin there. Here he comes, the crimson chin, to use as the shelf for Omega's forehead. And as you can see, my head was looking pretty accurate. And with a good paint job, he is actually looking pretty sexy. But this is where tragedy struck. For you see, this is not as Omega ended up. What you see before you was almost completely destroyed. I uploaded a video previously that talked about the kinds of paint that I use, and I mentioned how it remains somewhat sticky when used on polymer clay. This was a minor quibble before, but it was never really that big a deal. But for some reason, this time, the paint practically transmuted itself into glue and completely destroyed the paint job. The head was irreparably stained. The body just kept on shedding paint all over my fingers whenever I touched it. It was a complete teardown job. I had to cut off almost every clay piece and practically start over on Omega's torso from scratch, which really hurt because by the time I realized that I was going to have to do this, I had almost completed the figure. So at this point, I seriously considered simply refunding the CPK Studios money and saying that I couldn't pull it off. That's how close this project came to complete derailment. So what did I do? The answer, my friends, was to turn to a material that I've practically never used before. Well, I've used it to make some craft projects, but I never used it in an action figure. That is wood. What you are seeing is wood. which I hand carved with my Dremel into the shape of Omega's back, so that I may attach it to the rear of the figure and create a shape that I would be able to paint without turning into glue. The rocket nozzle is also made out of wood, but it's simply a dowel which I put into a pencil sharpener, which is the same technique that I use to such great effect to make grounders drills. The legs, by comparison, are barely worth mentioning. They require just a little bit of clay fabrication around the shins, and the only other thing worth noting is that here you can see the smooth shininess that Testor's model paints gives me. A great deal of the figure uses Testor's model paints instead of my usual Anita's acrylics, and I think it looks pretty nice. It doesn't need a sealant, and it's nice and shiny. So let's pull back. As you recall, the head was destroyed by the sticky paint incident, so at one point I had an Omega figure that looked like this. In case you're wondering, his shoulder pads are made from what was left of Hush's skirt after I made my Captain N figure, and I was not able to figure out a way to put those pipes around his waist, so I figured I'd just skip it and make the skirts without the pipes. I spent days wondering how I could make those pipes, but in the end, I just couldn't come up with anything that would be accurate and durable at the same time, so I just figured I'd compromise the design a little bit. I know it's not completely accurate, but hey, I've already had enough of a headache with this figure, and I wasn't gonna risk destroying what I had accomplished so far again. The only thing left was basically the top of Omega's head. Now I wanted to use a material other than clay because I was still afraid that the paints would ruin it, and if I left the clay bare, it would be prone to staining again. So I created this. I affectionately refer to it as the Vader helmet because it privately reminds me of Darth Vader's helmet from certain angles. It started out as an old top, which I used the Testor's paints on to make black, and of course I cut the pointy end of the cone off. The yellow part is clay, orange clay actually, but I took a sheet of plastic and cut it to the shape and overlaid that on top of the clay, which gave me a smooth plastic surface that I could paint the yellow on. So yes, this creates a durable yet volumized yellow helmet dome thing, which would top Omega's head quite well. Of course, how would I attach this? I'm glad you asked. I usually use super glue to put my figures together, but I figured with the limited surface area on the inside of that helmet that would be able to touch the remnants of Mantarctica's head, I'd need something with a bit more oomph. So, for the first time in 10 years, I utilized my hot glue gun. You never know when you're going to use that thing that's in the bottom of your drawer, you know? So, hot glued onto place, the head looks, well, complete. Now, I have so many things in my head to express the emotions I feel at finally seeing this figure complete, but frankly, none of them are really very family friendly. This is easily one of the most frustrating projects I ever took on. So suffice to say, I'm glad he's done, and I'm quite proud of my accomplishment, but nobody asked me for an Omega anytime soon. Wait for Jazzwares to make one, because I am not going to go through all this trouble a second time. Thank you, and have a good day.